My car slowed down on its own, even though my foot was on the gas. At first I thought it was the grade of the road. The mountain highway had been climbing for miles, a ribbon of asphalt threading through black pines, and the engine had already been working harder than it should. I pressed down, feeling the familiar resistance of the pedal, the vibration traveling up through my shoe, into my ankle. The tachometer dipped anyway. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the dark. Fog hung low over the road, not thick enough to blind me, just enough to dull the edges of things. The air inside the car felt colder than it had a minute ago, like someone had cracked a window. I glanced at the dashboard, no warning lights, no blinking symbols. The radio hummed softly with static between stations, a sound like breath held too long. I eased off the gas, then pressed again. The car responded with a faint, reluctant surge, then slowed once more, the speedometer needle drifting down as if nudged by an unseen finger. "Come on," I muttered, my voice sounding too loud in the small cabin. There was no cell service up here. I had checked 20 minutes ago, watching the bars vanish one by one until the screen went blank and useless. The GPS had already frozen. The map locked in a past moment that insisted the road ahead was a gray nothing. I was alone with the engine's uneven growl, the whisper of tires on damp pavement, and the slow, inexplicable loss of speed. I pressed harder. The pedal sank farther than it should have, spongy, wrong. The engine revved, high and thin, but the car didn't accelerate. It felt like pushing against something heavy, something that pushed back. The road curved sharply to the right. My headlights swept across a stand of trees and caught, for a heartbeat, on something pale between the trunks. A reflective sign, maybe, or a rock. It was gone before I could focus on it. The speedometer slid past 40. Then 35. Cold crept up my legs. I hadn't turned the heater down, but the vents breathed out air that smelled faintly metallic, like rain on old iron. I flexed my fingers on the steering wheel. The leather felt slick, damp with a moisture I didn't remember being there. "Okay," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Okay." I flicked on the hazard lights. The clicking sounded unnaturally loud, a metronome marking time I didn't want to count. I tried the brakes, just a tap. They responded instantly, sharp and eager, as if they had been waiting. When I released them, the car continued to slow anyway. 28. The road straightened, and the fog thickened. The beams of my headlights seemed to bend, the light diffusing, flattening the world ahead into a pale wall. The trees pressed closer to the shoulder, their branches reaching inward, skeletal hands frozen mid-grasp. I rolled down the window an inch just to feel something real. Cold air knifed in, sharp and wet. With it came a sound I couldn't place at first. Not wind, not an animal. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical. A low, dragging scrape that rose and fell in time with the rotation of the wheels. I rolled the window back up. The scrape persisted. 22. My heart thudded in my ears. I leaned forward, peering through the windshield as if proximity would help. The fog parted slightly, revealing a stretch of road ahead that looked off. The asphalt there was darker, almost glossy, as if freshly paved or soaked in oil. The headlights didn't reflect off it properly. The light seemed to sink in. The scrape grew louder as I rolled onto it. The steering wheel tugged gently to the left. I corrected, tugged again more insistently. The sensation wasn't violent. It was coaxing, patient, like a hand guiding my arm. "No," I whispered. The dashboard clock flickered. The digits smeared for a second, then reformed, wrong. An hour earlier than it should have been. The radio static swelled, resolving into something almost like a voice, stretched thin and warped. I reached to turn it off and felt a shock of cold when my fingers brushed the knob, as if it had been sitting in ice. Teen. The car's interior lights dimmed. Shadows pooled in the footwells, thickened in the back seat. I caught movement in the rearview mirror and jerked my gaze up, my pulse spiking. The back seat was empty. Of course it was. Just my coat slung over the headrest, its sleeve dangling like an arm. The scrape underneath the car changed pitch, becoming a dragging thump. I imagined something caught beneath the chassis, something heavy and unwilling to let go. The thought brought with it an image, unbidden, vivid, of hands gripping the undercarriage, knuckles grinding against steel, skin leaving pale streaks on the metal. I swallowed hard. 15. The road ahead dipped, then vanished into a hollow choked with fog. The darkness there felt deeper, layered. The headlights reached into it and failed, the beams breaking apart like light in water. I realized, with a slow bloom of dread, that I had driven this stretch before. Not recently, not even in this car. The memory surfaced in fragments. Another night, another vehicle, the same bend in the road. The same sense of pressure, of resistance. A sudden deceleration I hadn't been able to explain. A scream, my own or someone else's, I couldn't remember, that had cut off too abruptly. 10. My chest tightened. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the thought. I had never been in an accident up here. I would remember that. I would remember if the steering wheel wrenched hard to the left. I fought it, muscles straining. The tires squealed, a sound ripped raw by the fog. For a second the car resisted, shuddering like a living thing. Then the pull eased, not because I had one, but because it had decided to stop. The speedometer needle trembled at 8. I slammed my foot down all the way, metal to floor. The engine screamed. The car crept forward, inch by inch, like it was moving through thick mud. The scrape beneath me rose into a chorus, layered and uneven, as if more than one thing was dragging now. The temperature inside the car dropped sharply. My breath fogged in front of my face. Frost crept along the edges of the windshield, delicate and intricate, blooming outward from the corners. 6. I tasted copper. My hands were numb, my fingers stiff. The hazard lights clicked, 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 too fast now, out of rhythm. The road markings ahead, double yellow lines, began to blur, stretching, multiplying. For a terrifying moment there were too many of them, overlapping, leading in different directions. For the hollow loomed closer. As I descended, the fog thinned just enough for me to see what lay at the bottom. A car. It sat at an angle off the road, nose buried in the ditch, its rear end twisted toward the trees. The paint was a dull, familiar color. The shape of the dents along the side panel mirrored ones I had noticed, absently, on my own car weeks ago and never quite remembered earning. My headlights swept across the wrecked vehicle's interior. The driver's seat was empty. The scrape underneath my car became a sound I could no longer deny. Fingers, nails, the wet pull of skin against asphalt. The steering wheel vibrated with it, carrying the sensation up into my arms, into my bones. 3. Understanding settled over me with a terrible calm. The memory sharpened, aligning with the present. The other night, the slowdown, the moment I had looked away, just for a second, distracted by something pale between the trees. The impact, the way the car had finally stopped. 2. I was back there and not back there, moving forward and being drawn down, the road looping in on itself. The thing beneath the car, no, the things were not strangers. They were echoes, impressions pressed into the road and the metal and me, unfinished motions seeking completion. 1. The engine cut out. Silence fell, sudden and absolute, heavy enough to hurt. The car rolled the last few feet on its own momentum and stopped at the edge of the hollow, perfectly aligned with the wreck below. The headlights illuminated the empty driver's seat, the shattered windshield, the dark stain on the pavement that looked too much like a shadow and not enough like anything else. The hazard lights went dark. In the stillness, I felt the weight beneath the car shift. Hands released the metal. The cold began to ease. I sat there, shaking, listening to my own ragged breathing, telling myself that when the engine started again, when, not if, I would turn around, I would leave this place and never come back. The dashboard clock flickered once more. The digits corrected themselves. They matched the time stamped on the police report I would later find in my glove compartment, folded and yellowed, documenting a fatal accident on this stretch of road that I had no memory of surviving. Behind me, in the back seat, my coat slid softly to the floor, as if someone had just let go. The highway looped back to the same spot, but the scenery changed each time. I knew it because of the mile marker 47B. Leaning slightly to the right, its reflective paint chipped like a scab. I passed it once, twice, then a third time, each pass separated by long, silent stretches of road that should have taken me miles away. Every time I saw it again, a pressure built behind my eyes, as if my skull were remembering something my mind refused to hold. The first loop felt like a mistake. Fatigue, maybe. It was close to midnight, the kind of hour when the world thins out and your thoughts get loud. The highway was empty, a two-lane ribbon unspooling through low hills and scrubland. My headlights swept over pale grass and skeletal trees, their branches rattling faintly in the wind. The air coming through the vents smelled dry and dusty, tinged with engine heat. I passed mile marker 47B, glanced at it absently, and kept driving. 20 minutes later, I saw it again. Same lean, same chipped numbers, same dented guardrail just beyond it, bent inward like something had struck it and bounced away. I slowed, my foot easing off the gas, a chill crawling up my spine. I checked the dashboard clock. Time had moved forward normally. The fuel gauge had dipped a fraction. Nothing else looked wrong. Okay, I said aloud, just to hear a voice. Okay. The road ahead shimmered faintly, heat or fog. I couldn't tell which. I drove on, eyes locked forward, muscles tight. The second loop announced itself before I reached the marker. The temperature dropped sharply, cold enough that I could feel it through the soles of my shoes. The hum of the tires changed pitch, lower, rougher, like they were grinding over a different surface. The sky, which had been clear and starless, clouded over in a slow, seamless smear of darkness. The land on either side of the highway had shifted. The scrub was gone, replaced by dense stands of trees pressed close to the shoulder. Their trunks were darker, thicker, their bark split and furrowed like scar tissue. The branches arched overhead, knitting together to form a loose canopy that swallowed my headlights and spat back distorted shadows. When mile marker 47B emerged from the dark, it was rusted now, its reflective paint dulled to a sickly gray. Something had been carved into the metal beneath the numbers, lines and gouges that suggested symbols without resolving into anything readable. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. The leather was colder than it should have been. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I told myself there was a rational explanation, that highways curve and intersect, that markers get replaced, that exhaustion plays tricks. The words felt thin even as I thought them. The third loop arrived with sound. At first it was subtle, a distant, arrhythmic tapping that rose and fell with no discernible pattern. As I drove, it grew louder, resolving into a chorus of small impacts. My headlights caught flecks of movement in the air. Not drifting down from above, but moving sideways, skittering across the road in dry, whispering waves. The trees were gone. In their place stood rows of tall, blackened poles set back from the highway at uneven intervals. They leaned at different angles, some snapped short, others towering and bare, their tops lost in low-hanging smoke. Between them stretched fields of something brittle and pale, cracked like overcooked porcelain. The smell hit me next, burnt oil, old fire, and beneath it all, a faint sweetness that turned my stomach. My radio crackled to life without warning. Static surged, then thinned, resolving into a voice stretched long and slow, as if dragged through tar. Return! I slapped the power button. The sound cut out instantly, leaving a silence so deep it rang. Mile marker 47B stood ahead, half melted, its numbers warped and sagging. The guardrail was gone. In its place yawned a shallow depression filled with dark, granular debris. I thought of footprints, of the way ash holds impressions, and forced myself not to look too closely. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. I realized then that the loops weren't random. Each pass stripped something away. Trees, sky, warmth. Leaving the world thinner, harsher, more exposed. The fourth loop barely resembled a highway at all. The road narrowed, the asphalt crumbling at the edges. The painted lines faded to ghostly smears. The headlights illuminated only a short stretch ahead, the beam swallowed by a thick, rolling darkness that pressed close, intimate. The air inside the car grew stale and cold, carrying the faint scent of damp stone. Structures loomed beyond the shoulders, low, blocky shapes that suggested buildings without windows or doors. They crowded the road, leaning inward, their surfaces etched with shallow grooves that caught the light like scratches on bone. The tapping sound returned, louder now, closer. It came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the unseen surfaces around me. With it came another sound, softer but more unsettling. Breathing. Not mine. Slow, synchronized inhalations and exhalations that rose and fell in waves. I passed mile marker 47B again. It was pristine this time. Bright, new. The metal gleamed in my headlights, unmarred, untouched. For a moment relief flared, hot and foolish. Then I saw the number beneath it. 47A. My stomach dropped. I drove on, heart hammering, the breathing growing louder with each mile. The road dipped, descended into a long, gradual slope. The darkness thickened, pressing against the windshield, the side windows, the rearview mirror. I felt watched, not by eyes, but by attention. An awareness vast and impersonal, like pressure deep underwater. The fifth loop was almost gentle. The road smoothed out, the ride becoming eerily comfortable. The temperature warmed. A soft, diffuse light replaced my headlights, illuminating the highway evenly without shadows. The landscape opened up into rolling fields under a pale, featureless sky. I laughed, a short, hysterical sound. "There you are," I whispered. "There you are." But the fields were wrong. Too uniform, too still. As I drove, I realized they were covered in countless low shapes, arranged in precise rows. Markers, identical in size and spacing, stretching out to the horizon. Graves, no names, no dates, just smooth slabs, their surfaces worn by hands that had passed over them too many times. Mile marker 47B stood at the crest of a gentle hill, flanked by two of the markers. When I passed it, the breathing sound ceased. The car slowed, coasting, the engine purring contentedly. Memory surged, unbidden and sharp. A different night, rain, a missed exit, my eyes dropping to the GPS for just a second too long. The sudden, sickening sensation of weightlessness as the road fell away. Impact, darkness. The loops weren't the road repeating itself. They were me, each pass a reconstruction, a peeling back of layers as something vast and patient tried to remember who I had been, where I belonged. Each altered landscape a discarded possibility, an approximation grown closer to the truth. The car rolled to a stop. Ahead, the highway ended at a simple wooden sign, weathered and plain. 47B end. The engine died. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, expectant. I understood then that I wasn't being trapped or tested. I was being sorted. The light dimmed. The fields of markers stretched closer, tighter, one space among them subtly brighter than the rest, waiting for me to step into it and finally stop looping.